One tiny error unravels a carefully spun lie. Welcome to Cafe Echoes. I am your host, Silas Graves. Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from today? Your participation makes every mystery unforgettable. Let's uncover the truth. The March air in Mayfair had that peculiar London sharpness, clean enough to sting, yet still carrying the faint perfume of coal smoke and wet stone. It crept along the facades of the townhouses like a well-mannered intruder, polite in its approach and merciless in its chill. I confess I had just begun to congratulate myself on having secured a seat by the fire at Lady Anstruther's drawing room when the scream arrived and ruined everything. It came from above, thin at first, as though uncertain of its own right to exist in such a house, then swelling into something unmistakably human and absolutely indecorous. A teacup clinked. Someone dropped a spoon. For one absurd second the entire assembly, duchesses, diplomats, a financier with a waxed moustache, and two young women in identical pearls, froze like figures on a mantelpiece. Then the room burst into movement. "Upstairs!" cried Lady Anstruther, gathering her skirts with a decisiveness that suggested she had been waiting years for a crisis to organize. "Someone ring for Dr. Keene!" Men surged toward the door. Women followed, either from courage or curiosity. Often it is difficult to tell which. I went too, of course, propelled by that old soldier's reflex which insists that calamity is a thing you run toward, not away from. At the landing, the commotion thickened. A maid sobbed into her apron. A footman blocked a corridor with the stubborn loyalty of a castle guard. "It's Mr. Harrow." "Sir," he said, his voice pitching somewhere between terror and propriety. "In the blue sitting room." The blue sitting room, Lady Anstruther's private retreat, was at the end of the hall, its door ajar. Through the gap I saw a spill of lamplight, the glint of gilt frames, and a shape on the carpet that did not move. Lady Anstruther pushed inside first. The rest of us crowded behind like passengers straining for a view of a wreck. Benedict Harrow lay on his side, one arm bent under him in an almost childlike attitude, as though he had fallen asleep mid-sentence. Yet nothing about the scene suggested sleep. His eyes were open. His mouth, always so quick to smile, to flatter, to sharpen into wit, hung slightly parted. On the pale skin above his collar, a small dark bloom spread where a blade, neat as a signature, had entered. A knife lay close by, not a kitchen knife, but a slender letter opener of ivory and silver, the sort given as a gift to men who write many thank-you notes and mean none of them. Someone murmured, "Good God." Lady Anstruther did not faint. She stood very still, one gloved hand braced on the back of a chair, her gaze fixed not on the body, but on the writing desk against the far wall. Its drawers had been pulled out. Papers lay scattered like broken wings. "They've taken it," she said, and her voice, though quiet, carried a strange finality. "They've taken the letter?" "What letter?" demanded Sir Lionel Frobisher, the financier. His moustache quivered as though trying to climb off his face. "My dear lady, are you saying there's been robbery as well as this?" Lady Anstruther's eyes flicked to him, cool, assessing. "A letter, mister. Harrow had in his possession. He told me only an hour ago that it could ruin a name." At that, the air in the room altered. Murder was a horror, yes, but it was also, if one was frank, an event that belonged to the newspapers and to the police. Ruined names, however, belonged to everyone present. I saw shoulders stiffen, glances dart, the sudden, instinctive calculation behind polite faces. A closed circle, I realized, with a tightening in my chest, and every one of us now a part of it. "It's locked," said the footman from the doorway, as if reporting the weather. "The front door, I mean. Mr. Harrow asked for it after dinner, said he didn't want interruptions. "Then whoever did this is still in the house," whispered Miss Rosamond Vale, her cheeks drained of colour. She clutched her pearls with such force I thought they might snap and scatter. But Sir Alton Keene, the physician, arrived in a flurry and knelt beside the body. His fingers, professional and brisk, touched the throat, the wrist, the wound. He looked up. "Dead," he said simply. "Very recent. Within the last half hour." A clock ticked somewhere, too loud, too steady, the kind of ticking that makes you aware of every second you are alive. "And the police?" someone asked. Lady Anstruther nodded once. "Already sent for." It was at that moment, when the room was a tableau of dread and etiquette, when each person tried to look innocent by looking shocked, that I became aware of a small, almost comic detail. The blue sitting room was warm. The fire had been built up and was burning well. Yet a window stood open a few inches, letting in the biting March air. The curtains stirred faintly, like the sigh of a person trying not to speak. Dr. Keene followed my gaze. "Perhaps for air," he murmured. "Perhaps," I said. But something about it struck me as arranged. The open window, the neatness of the wound, the desk drawers pulled with a certain deliberation. Not the wild frenzy of panic, but the careful placement of a mind that wanted the scene to say something. A voice, low and precise, came from the corridor. "Permit me, I beg of you, do not all crowd like the cattle at the market." Heads turned, people parted as if compelled by an invisible hand. And there he was, small, immaculate, and utterly unhurried. Hercule Poirot, his moustaches as perfect as if he had polished them on the way up. He stepped into the room, took in the body, the scattered papers, the open window, and the faces. So many faces, each wearing its own mask. And he did not rush to the corpse. He did not ask for the weapon. Instead, he looked at Lady Anstruther and bowed slightly. "Madame," he said, "I am desolated for you. But you will do me the kindness to tell me, why does everyone insist already upon an alibi?" No one answered. In that silence, I felt it. The first hairline crack in whatever story had been prepared. Somewhere in this elegant house, an alibi had been built, carefully, confidently, upon a small mistake. Poirot's question, uttered with the mildest reproach, pricked the room into uneasy life. Denials rose at once, then faltered as Lady Anstruther lifted a hand. "Because," she said, controlling her voice by sheer will, "Mr. Harrow arranged to speak privately with several of us after dinner, one by one. We have all been in and out of that corridor." "Ah," said Poirot. His eyes brightened with that alert interest he reserved for the workings of the human mind. "So the alibi is demanded already, but, Madame, necessity is not the same thing as truth." He did not hurry to the body. He stood aside, hands behind his back, as though the dead man were a portrait, and the room its frame. Dr. Keene repeated his estimate. Death within the last half hour. Poirot nodded, then let his gaze travel to the open window and the stirring curtain. "You keep the room warm, and yet you invite March to join you," he observed. "It is a contradiction." Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. A constable appeared, then a broad-shouldered inspector with a square jaw and brisk impatience. "Inspector Wainwright," he announced, taking in the body, the knife, the scattered papers. "Everyone downstairs. Might no one leaves this house." Wainwright's eyes met Poirot's. "And you are?" Hercule Poirot. The name had weight even for a man who disliked interference. "You may listen," Wainwright conceded, "but I run this inquiry." "As you wish," said Poirot, serene. "You are the boots, I am only the little grey cells." We were ushered into the drawing room, where the fire burned, and the teacups waited like forgotten props. The company sat too straight, hands too still, faces arranged into expressions that looked remarkably alike. Poirot chose a chair with its back to the wall. Lady Anstruther sat opposite him, pale now, her composure fraying. "You spoke of a letter," Poirot prompted. "A letter that ruins a name." Lady Anstruther hesitated. "It was from my niece's husband, Gerald Ashby." Ashby, slim and careful, stiffened. "A private correspondence," he said. "Mr. Harrow obtained it," she went on. "He claimed it proved indiscretions, financial and perhaps worse. He meant to use it." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "So you wished it returned, monsieur?" "Of course." "And you, madame, wished it destroyed?" "I wished my family protected." Inspector Wainwright began the statements briskly. Lady Anstruther's account was simple. Dinner at 8, coffee at 9, guests drifting upstairs in pairs and trios. Harrow had asked to use the blue sitting room to sort papers and requested the front door be locked to avoid late callers. At about 10:30, she went up to tell him a guest wished to speak. The maid entered to build up the fire, screamed, and brought them all running. "Which guest?" Wainwright asked. Lady Anstruther glanced toward Ashby. "Mr. Ashby was waiting." Ashby nodded. "Harrow told me to sit in the library until he sent for me. That was about 10. He never did." "And you stayed there?" "I did." Wainwright turned to Miss Rosamond Vale. Her pearls trembled against her throat. "Mr. Harrow sent for me first," she said. 9:30. He said he had information about my brother, debts. He wanted me to persuade Henry to sign something. I said I must think." "When did you leave him?" 10 minutes later, perhaps." "And at 10:30? "In the conservatory," she answered quickly. "With Colonel Bellingham." Colonel Bellingham grunted. "True. The girl was upset. I offered brandy." Mr. Larkin, Harrow's secretary, looked as though the carpet might swallow him. "I brought him his ledger," he said, "at 9:45. He accused me of tampering with figures." I left. "Where did you go?" "To the pantry." Mrs. Faraday stated she remained downstairs in the morning room, writing a note. Sir Lionel claimed he was on the telephone in Lady Anstruther's study. Each tale laid itself down neatly, like a card placed face up. See how honest I am. Poirot listened without interruption. Yet I saw his attention hover on pauses, on the grip of fingers, on what was volunteered too readily. When Wainwright stepped aside to confer, I leaned toward Poirot. "It all sounds terribly straightforward." "That is what troubles me," Poirot murmured. "In a true confusion, people forget. They contradict. Here, they remember too well." "You think they have arranged it?" "I think someone has built an alibi as one builds a wall. Smooth bricks, no gaps. But always there is a small mistake." At that moment, a maid entered carrying a tray, decanter, glasses, and a folded scrap of paper. She approached Lady Anstruther. "Begging your pardon, my lady, this was on the hall table just inside the front door." Lady Anstruther unfolded it. Her eyes widened. The last colour left her face. Poirot rose. "May I?" She handed it to him, fingers shaking. Poirot read, and for the first time his expression altered, only by a fraction, but enough to chill me. "It is a message," he said quietly. "And it tells us the killer has not only taken the letter, he has left one behind." Inspector Wainwright snatched for it, but Poirot kept it a moment longer, smelling perfume upon the fold. Outside, a motor car rattled past. London indifferent. Inside, faces waited to hear what was written. Inspector Wainwright took the paper from Poirot's fingers, with an impatience he did not trouble to conceal. The room seemed to contract around him as he read aloud. "You have misjudged me. The proof you held is no longer yours to trade. Seek the flaw in your certainty." He lowered the sheet. What nonsense is this? Poirot extended his hand once more. "Permit me." He examined the paper closely. It is torn from a lady's correspondence card. Heavy stock, faint scent of violets, the handwriting, deliberately disguised. See how the letters lean first to the left, then correct themselves. One writes naturally to the right, but one attempts neutrality. "You can tell all that from a glance?" Wainwright demanded. "I can tell that the writer wished to appear calm," Poirot replied, and that he, or she, was not." Lady Anstruther pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "It was left in the hall. That means, said Wainwright, shortly, "someone had access to the front of the house after the murder." "But the door was locked," I said. "Locked does not mean inaccessible," the inspector retorted. "Who has keys?" The butler, solemn and dignified even in catastrophe, admitted that he, Lady Anstruther, and Mr. Harrow each possessed one. Harrow's key, we were told, had not been found on his person. Poirot's eyes flickered. "Ah!" Wainwright seized upon it. "So our murderer leaves the blue sitting-room, locks the front door behind him, places this melodramatic scrap on the hall table, and strolls away? That seems unlikely." "Unless," Poirot suggested mildly, "he never left at all." The silence that followed was heavy as velvet. Miss Vale's hand tightened once more on her pearls. Wainwright gave a curt order. "Search the house, every cupboard, every servant's stair. No one moves from this room." Constables dispersed. Their boots thudded above and below, an intrusion upon carpets accustomed to softer tread. In the drawing-room, tension stretched thin. Poirot remained standing, turning the paper between his fingers. "Seek the flaw in your certainty," he murmured. "It is an invitation. Our murderer is proud." "Or taunting?" I said. "Those two qualities are cousins, Hastings." He approached Miss Vale. "Mademoiselle, when you spoke with Mr. Harrow, was he composed?" She swallowed. "He was irritated. He said time pressed." "Pressed? In what manner?" "He expected a visitor, someone who would come after 10. Inspector Wainwright looked up sharply. "You omitted that." "I did not think it important." "On the contrary," said Poirot softly, "it is very important. Did he name this visitor?" "No." Colonel Bellingham shifted in his chair. If Harrow expected someone, why lock the front door? "Just so," said Poirot. Wainwright frowned. Perhaps he meant to admit them himself. "Then why leave a message inside the hall after the murder?" Poirot countered gently. "It suggests movement from within, not without." A constable returned. "No sign of anyone hiding, sir." "Windows?" Wainwright asked. "Secured, except the one in the blue sitting-room." All eyes turned to Poirot. He inclined his head slightly. "The window," he said, "was open but a few inches. Not enough for escape, yet enough to suggest the idea of escape. It is theatrical." "Then you think the note was placed to mislead?" Wainwright said. "I think," replied Poirot, "that the murderer desires us to believe in certainty and then doubt it." Lady Anstruther rose abruptly. "This is unbearable. Benedict was alive scarcely an hour ago. We were laughing, and now we dissect his death as though it were a puzzle box." Poirot's expression softened. "Madame, murder is always a puzzle box, but the pieces are human hearts." Sir Lionel cleared his throat. "Inspector, surely the simplest explanation is blackmail gone wrong. Harrow threatened Ashby. Ashby kills him." Ashby sprang up. "That is absurd." "Sit down," Wainwright ordered.
You were waiting in the library. Who can confirm it? The footman saw me. The footman nodded reluctantly. I passed the library at 10:20, sir, mister.
Oh, Ashby was inside. Alone? Yes, sir. Poirot watched Ashby with keen interest. Monsieur, did you hear anything unusual? A cry? Footsteps? Ashby hesitated. No. A curious thing, Poirot said. For if the maid screamed at 10:30 and Dr. Keene places death within the half hour, the moment of the act must have been near that time. Sound travels in such houses. Dr. Keene adjusted his spectacles. The wound was swift. There might have been no cry. Perhaps, Poirot conceded. But there was the open window, a draught strong enough to stir the curtain. Yet none of you remark upon a chill when you entered. I recalled it then, the warmth of the room despite March outside. Wainwright folded his arms. What are you implying? That someone opened that window after the act, Poirot said quietly. Not to escape.
Aye, but to alter the time. To alter. If death occurred earlier, Poirot continued, then our neat alibis at 10:30 dissolve. The wall inspector may not stand so straight as it appears. A murmur ran through the company. Miss Vale's eyes widened. Larkin wiped his brow. Wainwright glanced toward the stairs. Dr. Keene, could you have erred? The physician bristled. I gave an estimate. An estimate, Poirot echoed. And estimates may be guided by what we expect to find. He held up the note once more. Seek the flaw in your certainty. Our murderer knows that time is the foundation. If we are wrong about when Mr. Harrow died, then every alibi must be examined anew. Outside, a clock struck 11. Clear, resonant, undeniable. Inside, certainty fractured. And for the first time since the scream, I saw genuine fear, not of accusation,
but of the simple fact that the hour itself might be lying to us. The clock's final stroke seemed to hang in the air long after the sound itself had faded. 11. A clean, unquestionable hour, yet suddenly suspect. I felt, as I believe we all did, the ground shift beneath what had moments before appeared solid. Inspector Wainwright broke the silence first. Very well, he said crisply. We revisit the timeline. Dr. Keene, you based your estimate on body temperature. And rigidity, the physician replied. There was little stiffness. The wound had bled freely. Poirot inclined his head. And the fire in the blue sitting room was well built. A warm room delays the cooling of the body, does it not? Dr. Keene hesitated. It may, slightly. And if the window were opened afterward, Poirot continued, to admit cold air, or one might suppose death more recent than it was. Wainwright's jaw tightened. You are suggesting Mr. Harrow could have been killed before 10? I suggest nothing definitive, Poirot said smoothly. I merely observe that the window creates a contradiction. Lady Anstruther lowered herself back into her chair as though her strength had been cut. Before 10, she murmured. But we were all together until 9:30. Not entirely, Colonel Bellingham interjected. People drifted. I stepped out to take a cigar on the terrace around 9:15. In the dark, Sir Lionel asked sharply. There are lamps. And anyone see you? Bellingham's moustache bristled. The gardener, perhaps. Wainwright made a note. And you, Miss Vale? When exactly did your interview with Harrow conclude? She pressed her lips together.
Oh, I cannot swear to the minute. Try, said the inspector. 9:40 or thereabouts. Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. You said he expected a visitor after 10. Did he appear anxious? Yes. Anxiety, Poirot mused, is rarely punctual. It begins before the appointed hour. He turned to Larkin. Monsieur, when you brought the ledger at 9:45, how was Mr. Harrow? Agitated, Larkin whispered. He accused me of errors. He said everything must be settled tonight. Settled? Poirot repeated softly. Wainwright looked up. What was to be settled? Larkin swallowed. Accounts, investments managed on behalf of Lady Anstruther's estate. All eyes moved almost involuntarily toward her. She lifted her chin. Benedict handled certain private matters. Private matters that involved my money, Sir Lionel said with a harsh laugh.
Oh, Harrow advised half this room. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Then the letter was not the only instrument of pressure. The inspector stood abruptly. Enough conjecture? We verify facts. He addressed the butler. When did you last see Mr. Harrow alive? Shortly after 9, sir. He requested brandy be sent up. And who took it? A footman. The young man nodded nervously. At 9:20, sir. Mr. Harrow was alone, writing. Did you notice the window? It was closed. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. Messy. Wainwright glanced at him. You believe the window was opened after 9:20? It would appear so. Which narrows the window of death, the inspector said grimly. Between 9:20 and 10:30, a full hour. A generous hour, Poirot agreed, but not so generous as before. A constable entered quietly. Sir, we found Mr. Harrow's key in the pocket of his coat, hanging behind the blue sitting-room door. Wainwright frowned. His coat? Why not on him? Perhaps he removed it for comfort, Dr. Keene suggested. Or, said Poirot gently, perhaps someone wished us to think he had not left the room. The inspector's patience thinned. You cannot have it both ways, Monsieur Poirot. Either he lived until 10:30 or he died earlier. Either he admitted someone or he did not. Poirot smiled faintly. Life, Inspector, often has both ways. The question is not when the alibi was built, but why it required building. Miss Vale rose suddenly. You are twisting everything. If Mr. Harrow died earlier, then one of us must have seen... She stopped. Her gaze darted toward the staircase. Must have seen what? Poirot prompted softly. Nothing, she said, too quickly. Colonel Bellingham leaned forward. I did hear something, he admitted gruffly. A thud, around 9:50. I thought it a door. Wainwright seized on it. From upstairs? Yes. And you said nothing? It seemed trivial. Poirot's expression did not change, but I saw the quickening behind his eyes. A thud at 9:50, and yet at 10:20 Mr. Ashby sat undisturbed in the library. Ashby's face had grown pale. Are you implying I should have heard it? I imply nothing, Poirot said. I arrange the facts. Lady Anstruther's composure cracked at last. This is intolerable. Benedict was no saint, but he did not deserve... No one deserves murder, Poirot replied quietly, but many invite consequence. The words hung between them, charged. Wainwright exhaled sharply. Very well. We reconstruct movements from 9 to 10.
One by one. As he began assigning times, I felt the pattern tightening. 9:15, Bellingham on the terrace. 9:20, brandy delivered. 9:40, Miss Vale leaves. 9:45, Larkin brings the ledger. 9:50, a thud heard. 10, Ashby waits in the library. 10:20, footman passes again. 10:30, the scream, a clean progression. Too clean. Poirot remained silent until the list was complete. Then he spoke, almost conversationally. There is one absence. Wainwright looked up. What absence? No one, Poirot said, has accounted for the moment at precisely 10 o'clock. The inspector frowned. Ashby was in the library. Yes, waiting. And? And a man waiting listens, Poirot said softly. For footsteps, for summons, for the sound of the door he expects to open. Ashby's throat worked.
I heard nothing. Nothing at all? Nothing. Poirot's gaze held him. That, monsieur, is very curious. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the panes as though in quiet confirmation. Inside, the hour of 10, once secure, began to look less like a point in time and more like the small mistake upon which an alibi might rest. Ashby's insistence lingered in the room like a draught no one could quite locate. Nothing at all. It was a statement too absolute for comfort. In a house filled with shifting guests, murmuring servants, and the occasional creak of settling wood, nothing possessed a suspicious neatness. Inspector Wainwright leaned forward. You heard no footsteps? No raised voices? No, Ashby replied, though a faint tremor had entered his tone. If Harrow was killed at 10, I would have known. Poirot tilted his head. Precisely. Oh, monsieur, you would have known. Ashby flushed. Then perhaps he was killed earlier, as you suggest. Perhaps, said Poirot mildly. But let us examine the matter of waiting. You were in the library from 10 until the scream at 10:30? Yes. Doing what? Reading. Which book? Ashby hesitated a fraction too long. A volume of Tennyson. Sir Lionel gave a snort. You expect us to believe you recited poetry while a blackmailer bled upstairs? Ashby shot him a glare. I expected a private conversation, not murder. Poirot rose. May we see this volume? Wainwright nodded curtly. A constable fetched it from the library. The book lay open upon the side table, its spine strained. Poirot lifted it delicately. It is opened midway, he observed, to Ulysses, a fine poem of endurance. Yet, he turned several pages. The paper here bears no crease, no impression of a thumb. Ashby stiffened. What are you implying? That you did not read it, Poirot replied gently. You waited, yes, but you did not read. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Wainwright's voice hardened. Why lie about that? I did not lie, Ashby protested. I intended to read. Intention, Poirot murmured, is not action. Lady Anstruther clasped her hands. Gerald, if you know something— I know nothing, he burst out. Poirot regarded him steadily. You were anxious. Not because you feared Harrow's letter, though that is understandable, but because you feared what he might say aloud. A letter can be destroyed. Words spoken before witnesses cannot. Ashby's composure cracked for an instant. He threatened to expose an investment. Nothing more. An investment conducted through Mr. Larkin? Poirot asked. Larkin startled. I handled certain transfers. Transfers that were irregular, Poirot said softly. Inspector Wainwright seized the thread. Irregular how? Larkin's face drained of colour. Temporary loans to cover losses. They would have been repaid. From whose funds? The inspector demanded. Larkin glanced helplessly at Lady Anstruther. Sir Lionel exhaled sharply. Good God. Poirot stepped in before the outburst could swell. Monsieur Larkin, when you left Mr. Harrow at 9:45, was he alone? Yes. Did he mention the expected visitor? No, only that everything must conclude tonight. Conclude, Poirot repeated, a word with weight. Miss Vale spoke suddenly, her voice thin. If he meant to confront someone else at 10, then Gerald's waiting is irrelevant. On the contrary, Poirot said, it becomes central. If Mr. Harrow had two matters to settle, financial and personal, he would choose the order carefully. Wainwright folded his arms, which suggests that the first confrontation may already have occurred before 10, Poirot replied. Colonel Bellingham shifted. You think the thud I heard at 9:50 may have marked the end, Poirot finished. A faint gasp escaped Miss Vale. Wainwright paced once across the carpet. If Harrow died at 9:50, Then the scream at 10:30 becomes a discovery delayed by 40 minutes. And the open window, Poirot added, becomes an adjustment to deceive the doctor. Lady Anstruther's gaze moved slowly from face to face. But who would dare remain in this house for 40 minutes after committing murder? Poirot's eyes rested on her with quiet gravity. Someone who required an alibi anchored to 10 o'clock. The implication settled like frost. Ashby's knuckles whitened on the chair's arm. "You build everything on conjecture," he said hoarsely. "No," Poirot replied. "On a small mistake. You said you would have heard if death occurred at 10. Yet you also claim you heard nothing at all. If Harrow was alive and speaking with another at 10, there would have been sound. If he was already dead, the house would have been quieter." Wainwright stopped pacing. "Then we verify. Who saw Mr. Harrow after 9:45? No one answered. The butler cleared his throat. "I passed the blue sitting room at 5 minutes to 10, sir. The door was closed. I heard no voices." "Which proves nothing," Sir Lionel snapped. "On the contrary," Poirot said, "it proves that the moment of confrontation may have preceded that time." Miss Vale rose unsteadily. "You are turning suspicion upon all of us." "Suspicion," Poirot replied gently, "is already here. I merely illuminate where it stands." He moved toward the mantelpiece, adjusting a small porcelain shepherdess that had tilted askew during the earlier commotion. The gesture, trivial and meticulous, steadied the room. "Consider," he continued, "the message left in the hall. Seek the flaw in your certainty. The writer knew we would construct a timeline. He invites us to question it." "Why?" "To confuse us," Wainwright said. "Or to boast," Poirot countered. "To demonstrate superiority." Ashby let out a brittle laugh. "You imagine a criminal philosopher." "I imagine," Poirot said quietly, "a mind that delights in precision and in the illusion of precision." His gaze shifted, not to Ashby this time, but to Miss Vale. "Mademoiselle, when you left Mr. Harrow at 9:40, did you encounter anyone on the stairs?" She hesitated. "Think carefully," Poirot urged. "Yes," she whispered at last. "Lady Anstruther." All eyes turned once more. Lady Anstruther met their stares without flinching. "I was going to my room." "At 9:40?" Poirot asked. "Yes." "And did you see Mr. Harrow alive?" "I did not enter." "But you paused outside the door?" Her silence was answer enough. Inspector Wainwright stepped forward. "Madam, we must be clear. Did you hear anything?" Lady Anstruther's composure wavered just slightly. "I heard raised voices. A man's voice."
"Not Benedict's." The words fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples through every face in the room. For if a man's voice had argued with Harrow before 10, then someone's certainty, someone's carefully built alibi, was about to crack beyond repair. The admission seemed to draw the very air from the room. A man's voice, not Harrow's. For several seconds no one spoke. It was as though each person were privately measuring the pitch and timbre of his own voice, wondering how it might have sounded in anger through a closed door. Inspector Wainwright was the first to recover. "You are certain of that, Lady Anstruther?" "I am," she replied steadily, though her hands were tightly clasped. Benedict's voice was lighter, almost amused even when displeased. This was deeper, sharper. "And you did not mention it earlier because I was not asked," she said, "and because I was not sure it mattered." Poirot regarded her with an expression of mild reproach. In a house where a man lies dead, everything matters. He turned slowly, allowing his gaze to pass from Colonel Bellingham to Sir Lionel from Ashby to Larkin. We must consider which of you was unaccounted for at 9:40. Colonel Bellingham cleared his throat. I was on the terrace at 9:15, returned by 9:30. Alone? Wainwright pressed. Yes. And from 9:30 to 10? In the smoking room. Sir Lionel joined me briefly. Sir Lionel nodded. For a cigar. I left before 10 to make my telephone call. At what hour precisely? Poirot asked.
Or 5 minutes to 10. Which coincides with the butler's passage along the corridor, Poirot observed. Interesting. Sir Lionel's eyes flashed. Are you implying? I imply only that our minutes must be exact, Poirot said gently. He turned to Larkin. Monsieur, after leaving the blue sitting room at 9:45, where did you go? To the pantry, Larkin repeated, his voice thin. I remained there until the scream. Entirely? Yes. Can anyone confirm? The butler hesitated. I saw Mr. Larkin at intervals. Intervals, Poirot repeated. Not continuously. Larkin's forehead gleamed with perspiration. Poirot then faced Ashby once more. You were in the library from 10, but before 10? In the drawing room, Ashby said, with the others. Until? Until 10? Miss Vale's voice broke in softly. He left at 5 minutes to 10. Ashby shot her a startled look. You said nothing of that. I remembered just now, she faltered. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Memory is a curious servant, mademoiselle. It obeys when it pleases. Inspector Wainwright seized upon it. Mr. Ashby, where were you between 9:55 and 10? Ashby hesitated. The pause stretched. I stepped into the corridor, he admitted at last. For what purpose? To see if Harrow was ready. And was he? I did not knock. Why not? Ashby's composure frayed visibly. Because I heard voices. A collective intake of breath answered him. 2 voices? Poirot asked softly. Yes. Recognizable? No, the door was closed. And yet you did not remain to listen, Poirot pressed. Ashby's jaw tightened.
It seemed improper. Improper, Sir Lionel echoed with a harsh laugh. In a house of blackmail. Enough, Wainwright snapped. Mr. Ashby, how long did you stand there? A minute? Perhaps less. And then I went to the library to wait. Poirot folded his hands. So, at 9:55 you hear 2 voices, one Mr. Harrow's, one another man's. At 9:40, Lady Anstruther hears raised voices, one not Harrow's. At 9:50, Colonel Bellingham hears a thud. And by 10, the corridor is silent. The pattern lay before us now, stark and unavoidable. Inspector Wainwright spoke slowly. Which suggests the confrontation occurred before 10. The murder likely at or near 9:50. And the alibis anchored to 10 o'clock, Poirot murmured, become less secure. Miss Vale rose unsteadily. This is monstrous.
We were all within a few yards of him. Yes, Poirot said quietly. Murder does not require distance, only decision. He began to pace, not hurriedly, but with deliberate thought. Let us consider the psychology. Mr. Harrow summons individuals one by one, Miss Vale, Monsieur Larkin, and perhaps others. He anticipates a final meeting at 10. He locks the front door to prevent interruption. He builds tension. It is a performance. A performance that ends badly, Wainwright said dryly. Or precisely as someone intended, Poirot replied. He stopped before Lady Anstruther. Madame, when you heard the raised voices at 9:40, were they angry? Yes. Violent? No. Urgent. Did you recognize the second voice as belonging to any gentleman here? Her gaze moved across them slowly. It lingered for a fraction on Sir Lionel, then on Colonel Bellingham, and finally on Ashby. I cannot say, she whispered. Poirot nodded, as though that answer confirmed something rather than obscured it. Inspector Wainwright folded his notebook shut with decision. "Very well. We focus on the period between 9:40 and 9:55. No one leaves this house. I will have statements written." As he moved toward the door, Poirot spoke once more. "There is still the matter of the note left in the hall." Wainwright paused. "What of it?" "It was placed after the murder," Poirot said, "which means the murderer moved through the house after 9:50. And only someone confident of their alibi would dare to linger." The implications settled like dust after a fall. Ashby's face had gone ashen. Larkin stared at the carpet. Sir Lionel's expression hardened into something guarded and calculating. Poirot's voice softened. "The flaw in certainty is not the hour, my friends. It is the assumption that the murderer fled. On the contrary, he remained among you, calm, composed, and very certain that 10 o'clock would protect him." Outside, the wind rose again, rattling faintly against the panes. Inside, the certainty of 10, once a refuge, had become a trap. And somewhere within that narrow span of 15 minutes, a small mistake waited to be uncovered, like a crack in polished glass that only the most meticulous eye could see. The room felt smaller after Poirot's pronouncement, as though the walls themselves had edged closer to listen. The idea that the murderer had not fled but lingered among us altered every glance, every breath. The 10 o'clock was no longer a shield, it was a spotlight. Inspector Wainwright resumed his seat with renewed focus. "If the act occurred around 9:50, he said, "then we examine who could have entered the blue sitting room at that time without attracting notice." "Someone already moving about the corridor," Poirot suggested softly. "Someone whose presence would not alarm." "The household staff?" Wainwright asked sharply. The butler stiffened. "My staff have served this family faithfully for years." Poirot raised a conciliatory hand. "I do not accuse, I analyze. A servant passing the corridor would not surprise Mr. Harrow, nor would a guest expected for 10. Ashby's lips pressed thin. Wainwright leaned forward. "Lady Anstruther, after you heard the raised voices at 9:40, what did you do?" "I went to my room," she replied. I did not wish to overhear." "And remained there?" "For some minutes, I cannot say how long." "Until when?" "Until I returned downstairs shortly before 10. Miss Vale looked up quickly. "I saw you on the stairs at 5 minutes to 10. Lady Anstruther inclined her head. "Yes." Poirot interjected gently. "Did you encounter anyone else upon the stairs, madame?" She hesitated. "No." Colonel Bellingham shifted in his chair. "I was in the smoking room until 10. "Alone?" Wainwright asked. "Sir Lionel stepped out before 10, as he said." Sir Lionel nodded. "To use the telephone in the study." "At precisely what time?" Poirot asked. 5 minutes to 10. I am certain because the clock on the mantel had just chimed the quarter." Poirot's eyes flickered. "The study clock chimes at the quarter hour?" "Yes." "And you remained there how long?" 10 minutes, perhaps less." "Did you speak with anyone?" "No." "Did you hear anything unusual?" Poirot persisted. Sir Lionel frowned. "No." A faint crease appeared between Poirot's brows. "Curious." "What is curious?" Wainwright demanded. "That 2 gentlemen in adjacent rooms, one in the library, one in the study, hear nothing of raised voices or a thud in the corridor between them." The inspector considered this. The library and study both opened onto the same passage that led to the blue sitting room. Sound in such houses travelled with inconvenient clarity. Ashby spoke defensively. "The doors were closed." "As was Mr. Harrow's," Poirot replied. "Yet Lady Anstruther heard." Silence again. Larkin shifted nervously. Perhaps the voices ceased before 10. Indeed, Poirot said, which returns us to 9:50. He moved toward the window, peering out into the darkened street below. If Mr. Harrow died at 9:50, and the window was opened afterward to admit cold air, the person who did so must have remained in the room for several minutes. To stage the scene, I murmured. Exactly, Hastings. Wainwright's patience thinned. All this circles the same point. We require something tangible. Poirot turned back slowly. Very well, let us consider the letter. Every face sharpened at once. Mr. Harrow possessed a letter capable of ruin. It has vanished. The note in the hall declares the proof no longer yours to trade. This suggests the murderer retrieved the original and left the taunt. Obvious, Sir Lionel said curtly. Or not entirely, Poirot replied. If the letter were the motive, the killer need only take it and depart. Why risk a written message that invites scrutiny? To mislead, Wainwright said. Or to demonstrate control, Poirot countered. The message assumes we will accept 10 o'clock as the moment of death. It dares us to question it. Ashby's voice trembled slightly. You said earlier the flaw was the assumption the murderer fled. Yes. And now? Now I observe another flaw. He approached the writing desk brought from the blue sitting room and placed upon a side table for examination. Papers lay scattered as before. Poirot sifted them carefully, aligning edges, noting impressions. Mr. Larkin, he said without looking up. You brought a ledger at 9:45. Yes. Was Mr. Harrow writing when you entered? He was seated at the desk. With what? A fountain pen. Poirot lifted the pen from among the papers. Ink still moist upon the nib when found? Dr. Keene nodded. There was some dampness. And yet, Poirot continued, if death occurred at 9:50 and the window remained closed until after, the ink should have dried in the warmth of the room. But the doctor noted it was not entirely dry. Wainwright frowned. Meaning? Meaning the desk was disturbed later, after the window was opened, after the cooler air entered. The implication dawned slowly. Someone returned to the desk, I said. To search, Poirot agreed. Or to remove something. The letter, Ashby breathed. Precisely. Inspector Wainwright's gaze hardened, which narrows our suspect to someone who had reason to search thoroughly. Someone with familiarity, Poirot added softly. Someone unafraid to linger. Miss Vale's composure finally cracked. This is unbearable. If the murderer stayed among us for 40 minutes, speaking calmly, drinking brandy, then he is a man of remarkable composure, Poirot said. A constable entered quietly and handed Wainwright a small object wrapped in cloth. The inspector unfolded it and frowned. This was found beneath the writing desk. He held it up, a fragment of ivory, slender and curved. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes narrowed. It is not part of the letter opener, Wainwright said. It appears to be from a cufflink. Colonel Bellingham glanced at his sleeves reflexively. Sir Lionel did the same. Ashby's hands remained motionless on his knees. Poirot took the fragment delicately. Ivory, carved, distinctive. He looked up slowly, his gaze resting, not accusingly, but with measured curiosity, upon one man in particular. The small mistake, he murmured, may not lie in the hour at all, but in what was left behind. Poirot held the ivory fragment between finger and thumb as though it were a rare gem rather than a broken trifle. The lamplight caught along its curved edge, revealing a delicate pattern, an incised line, almost imperceptible unless one looked closely. Inspector Wainwright scanned the room. "Gentlemen," he said sharply, "your cuffs." There was a faint rustle of fabric as sleeves were drawn back. Colonel Bellingham's links were plain gold. Sir Lionel wore heavy onyx squares. Larkin's were modest brass. Ashby's silver knots unadorned. None were ivory. But Poirot did not appear disappointed. On the contrary, his eyes gleamed with a quiet satisfaction. "It is not from tonight," he said calmly. Wainwright frowned. "What do you mean?" "The break is not fresh. See," he indicated the worn edge. "There is slight discoloration. This fragment has lain beneath that desk for some time." A collective breath escaped the room. "Then it has nothing to do with the murder," Sir Lionel said briskly. "On the contrary," Poirot replied, "it may have everything to do with it." He placed the fragment carefully upon the table. If it has lain there unnoticed, then the murderer did not see it when he searched the desk after the act. "You are assuming again that someone searched afterward," Wainwright said. "I assume because the ink tells me so," Poirot answered mildly. "Well, and because the letter vanished." Ashby's voice cut in, strained. "Then the fragment is irrelevant." Poirot turned to him. "Is it, monsieur? Consider. A fragment overlooked during a search suggests haste or agitation. Our murderer was composed enough to stage the window and leave a note, yet not composed enough to notice what lay beneath his hand." Miss Vale shivered. "You speak as though you see him." "I see only the mind," Poirot said softly. Inspector Wainwright tapped the fragment with his pencil. "If it predates tonight, whose is it?" Lady Anstruther's brow furrowed faintly. "Ivory cufflinks were once fashionable. My late husband owned a pair." "Where are they now?" Wainwright asked. "In the house, I believe, locked away." Poirot's head inclined slightly. "And Mr. Harrow? Did he possess any?" "I do not think so," she replied. Colonel Bellingham shifted uneasily. "If the fragment has been there some time, what does it signify?" "It signifies," Poirot said, "that someone else has stood at that desk in agitation before." The implication was subtle, yet profound. Harrow's dealings had not been peaceful. The blue sitting room had witnessed tension long before tonight. Wainwright rose. "Search Lady Anstruther's effects for the matching cufflink, quietly." A constable withdrew. Poirot resumed his seat, steepling his fingers. "Now we return to the hour between 9:40 and 10. Ashby gave a short, humourless laugh. "Again?" "Yes," Poirot said gently, but with a new perspective. He addressed Lady Anstruther. "You heard raised voices at 9:40. Could you distinguish words?" "No," she said after a moment. "Only urgency." "Male voices both?" She hesitated.
I cannot be certain. I assumed." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Assumptions are dangerous." Inspector Wainwright looked up. "Are you suggesting the second voice may not have been a man's?" "I suggest only that in heightened moments pitch alters," Poirot replied. "A woman in anger may sound deeper." Miss Vale's hand flew to her throat. "You cannot mean—" "I mean nothing yet," Poirot said calmly. Sir Lionel leaned forward. "This is absurd. We circle endlessly. If Harrow was killed at 9:50, then who among us lacked an alibi at that moment?" "Several," Wainwright admitted. "Then choose one," Sir Lionel snapped. Poirot smiled faintly. "The murderer has already chosen, monsieur." The constable returned quietly, carrying a small velvet box. He handed it to the inspector, who opened it and frowned. "Empty." Lady Anstruther stiffened.
"Or empty?" "The compartment where the cufflinks should be," Wainwright said. A murmur rippled through the room. "I have not opened that box in years," she said faintly. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And who had access to it?" "My dressing room is not locked." Then the fragment beneath the desk, Poirot said softly, may not be so old after all. Inspector Wainwright's expression darkened. You just said the break was not fresh. It is not fresh tonight, Poirot corrected gently. But it may not be ancient. The discoloration suggests weeks, months perhaps. Ashby's composure wavered again. And that proves what? It proves, Poirot replied, that someone recently handled Lady Anstruther's cufflinks, someone who may have broken one. Colonel Bellingham's gaze shifted uneasily toward Ashby. Ashby's voice sharpened. Why look at me? Because, Bellingham said bluntly, you manage much of the household's financial correspondence. You might have had reason to access Lady Anstruther's private rooms. That is outrageous, Poirot intervened smoothly. Let us not quarrel. Instead, let us consider motive. He rose once more, pacing slowly. Mr. Harrow held a letter capable of ruin. He intended confrontation at 10. At 9:40, voices are heard. At 9:50, a thud. Afterward, the murderer remains, adjusts the window, searches the desk, retrieves the letter, and leaves a taunting note in the hall. And breaks a cufflink in the struggle, I added. Poirot inclined his head. Possibly. Wainwright's tone hardened. If the cufflink belonged to Lady Anstruther's late husband, and one is missing,
Then whoever wore it recently must explain. Lady Anstruther's face had grown very pale. I gave them once, she said slowly, to Benedict, as a jest. He admired their craftsmanship. Every head turned. Recently? Poirot asked quietly. A fortnight ago. The implications shifted again. Inspector Wainwright spoke carefully. Then Mr. Harrow may have worn them tonight. Dr. Keene nodded. He was in evening dress, it is possible. And if one broke during a struggle, Wainwright continued, the fragment could have fallen beneath the desk at 9:50. Poirot's eyes shone with sudden intensity. Yes. And if the murderer overlooked it in his haste, believing all evidence removed, then the small mistake, I said slowly, was not in the alibi, but in assuming nothing remained to betray him. Ashby's breathing had grown shallow.
Gillarkin stared fixedly at the carpet. Sir Lionel's fingers drummed once upon the armrest, then stilled. Poirot picked up the ivory fragment once more. A fragment, he murmured, and yet it may shatter an entire certainty. Outside, the wind had dropped. The house seemed unnaturally still, as though listening for the next revelation. And in that charged quiet, the circle of suspicion tightened, no longer anchored merely to the hour of 10, but to a single, overlooked piece of ivory that might soon demand its owner. Inspector Wainwright rose with renewed purpose. Dr. Keene, he said, we must examine Mr. Harrow's cuffs at once. Within minutes, we were again ascending the staircase, the earlier chaos replaced by a strained quiet. The blue sitting room stood as we had left it, lamplight steady, papers strewn, but the window still ajar to the March air. Harrow's body had not yet been removed. Death, in its stillness, seemed almost to listen. Dr. Keene knelt and gently adjusted the sleeve of the evening coat. There was a pause, long enough for the silence to grow painful. "Well?" Wainwright demanded. "One cufflink remains," the doctor said at last. "Ivory, carved." "And the other?" "Missing." The inspector exhaled sharply. Then the fragment beneath the desk belonged to Mr. Harrow. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes intent upon the surviving link. "Observe the carving," he murmured. "A fine incised border. The fragment matches." Lady Anstruther swayed slightly. "I had forgotten he wore them tonight." "You saw him earlier?" Poirot asked. "At dinner?" "Yes." "And you did not remark upon the cufflinks when you heard the voices?" No. Poirot nodded.
Naturally. Wainwright turned to the desk. If there was a struggle, we must see signs of it. At first glance, the room appeared orderly, save for the scattered papers. But Poirot crouched beside the desk, studying the carpet. Here, he said softly. A faint scuff marked the pile near the chair, barely visible unless one bent low. Another mark showed by the leg of the desk as though a shoe had slid. 2 men grappling, Wainwright said grimly. Perhaps, Poirot replied, or 1 man and another person of less strength. Ashby, who had followed despite the inspector's reluctance, spoke from the doorway. You imply I fought him. I imply nothing, Poirot said calmly. I reconstruct. He rose and regarded the body thoughtfully. The wound is precise, not wild, a thrust delivered at close range. Dr. Keene nodded.
Clean and direct. Which suggests, Poirot continued, that the quarrel, though urgent, did not descend into chaos. The fatal act came swiftly. Then the cufflink broke in the initial scuffle, Wainwright said. Possibly. Miss Vale's voice drifted faintly from the corridor. If he wore them at dinner and one is missing, then whoever struck him must have been close enough to grasp his sleeve. Yes, Poirot said softly. Close enough to touch. Inspector Wainwright straightened. Mr. Ashby, step forward. Ashby entered reluctantly. You admit to standing outside this door at 5 minutes to 10, hearing voices, Wainwright said. If the confrontation occurred minutes earlier, you could have been inside. I was not. Can anyone confirm your presence in the corridor at that moment? No, Ashby said, colour rising in his face. Because I stood there alone. Convenient, Sir Lionel muttered from behind. Ashby rounded on him. You were in the study, alone. Wainwright lifted a hand. Enough. Poirot remained quiet, his gaze moving between them. Inspector, permit me a question for each. Wainwright gave a curt nod. Poirot addressed Sir Lionel first. Monsieur, when you used the telephone at 5 minutes to 10, did you connect with anyone? Sir Lionel hesitated. The line did not answer. So no one heard you speak? No. Then your alibi rests upon the clock's chime alone. Sir Lionel's jaw tightened. Yes. Poirot turned to Colonel Bellingham. You heard a thud at 9:50. Did you investigate? No. Why not? It seemed trivial. Poirot's eyes flickered. Trivial sounds often conceal grave events. He faced Larkin next. Monsieur, you handled Mr. As Harrow's accounts, if exposure threatened, you too had motive. Larkin trembled. I would never kill, Poirot finished gently. Perhaps not, but fear drives men to desperate acts. Finally, he regarded Lady Anstruther. Madame, the letter, was it addressed to you or to Mr. Ashby? To Gerald, she said quietly. And yet Mr. Harrow kept it, not you. Yes. So he held power over your family's name? Her eyes filled briefly, but she did not look away. Inspector Wainwright interjected. All of you had motive in varying degree. We require something more definite. Poirot stepped toward the window. Inspector, when was this window last cleaned? The butler, summoned, answered promptly. This morning, sir? Poirot examined the sill. There is a faint smear here, near the latch. Wainwright leaned closer. A dust displaced, or oil from a hand, Poirot suggested, from opening it after the murder. Precisely, he straightened, if we test the cuffs of each gentleman present for fibres from this curtain. Wainwright's eyes narrowed. You distrust the alibis still? I distrust certainty, Poirot replied. Ashby's composure had frayed completely. This is intolerable. You build suspicions upon fragments and smears. Yes, Poirot said softly. Because murder often leaves fragments. He stepped back from the body, his expression contemplative. One more point, Inspector. What now? The note left in the hall, written on scented card. Did we examine whose correspondence it resembles? Wainwright frowned. No! Poirot's gaze shifted toward Miss Vale, who stood pale in the doorway. Mademoiselle, he said gently, do you use violet-scented stationery? Her face blanched. Many ladies do. Indeed, but the scent was distinct, subtle, like the perfume you wear. A murmur rippled through the room. I did not write that note, she whispered. I have not said you did, Poirot replied calmly. Only that the murderer wished us to think of you or of someone like you. Inspector Wainwright's expression hardened, which suggests deliberate misdirection. Yes, Poirot said. The small mistake may not be the cufflink alone. It may be the assumption that the obvious motive is the true one. He looked around the circle, his gaze lingering just a fraction longer on one face than the others. The murderer, he said quietly, counted on our attention fastening upon blackmail and scandal. But the truth may lie not in what Mr. Harrow threatened to reveal. He paused, the silence stretching taut. But in what he intended to conceal. And in that moment, I sensed that the investigation had shifted again, away from the vanished letter, and toward a deeper, more dangerous secret hidden beneath the polished surface of Lady Anstruther's house. The suggestion settled over us like a second shadow cast by the first. What Harrow intended to conceal. Until that moment, every thought had circled the vanished letter as the nucleus of the crime. Now Poirot had shifted the center of gravity. Inspector Wainwright regarded him keenly. You believe the motive was not blackmail? I believe blackmail was the surface, Poirot replied quietly. A convenient narrative. But men who blackmail rarely summon all parties into proximity unless they are certain of control. Mr. O'Harrow was confident, too confident. Ashby gave a strained laugh. Confident men are often mistaken. Just so, Poirot agreed. He moved back toward the writing desk and began, with infinite care, to reorder the scattered papers, not to tidy, but to understand. Monsieur Larkin, he said, without looking up, these ledgers, were they complete? Larkin hesitated. As far as I know. As far as you know, Poirot repeated softly. And yet Mr. Harrow accused you of irregularities. Yes. Were those irregularities discovered recently? Yes, within the week. Poirot's fingers paused over a sheaf of documents. And who brought them to his attention? Larkin swallowed. Sir Lionel. Every head turned. Sir Lionel stiffened. I audit investments as a matter of course. Harrow's figures did not align. Not align in what way? Wainwright demanded. Funds transferred between accounts without authorization. Lady Anstruther's accounts? Poirot asked. Among others. Lady Anstruther's composure trembled. Benedict assured me everything was in order. And perhaps, Poirot said gently, it was not. Sir Lionel's gaze hardened. If Harrow was embezzling, then exposure would ruin him. Precisely, Poirot murmured. Inspector Wainwright's tone sharpened. You are suggesting Harrow's threat was a bluff. I suggest, Poirot replied, that a man accused of financial misconduct might attempt to deflect suspicion by wielding a scandalous letter. Ashby's eyes widened. Then the letter may have been leverage, Poirot finished, not salvation. The implications unfolded swiftly. If Harrow's position was precarious, if discovery loomed, then the balance of power shifted. Miss Vale spoke faintly. He meant to accuse someone else first. To protect himself, Poirot said. Wainwright's expression grew intent. Then the confrontation at 9:40 was not solely about Ashby's letter. No, Poirot agreed. It may have concerned accounts. He turned to Sir Lionel. Monsieur, when you examined the figures, did you confront Mr. Harrow directly? I informed him privately this afternoon. And his reaction? He was indignant, dismissive. Did he threaten you? Sir Lionel hesitated. He implied he possessed information damaging to my own affairs. A faint ripple moved through the room. Poirot nodded slowly. Thus Mr. Harrow was not merely a blackmailer. He was a man cornered. Inspector Wainwright leaned forward. And a cornered man may provoke desperate retaliation. Indeed, Poirot said softly. He moved once more to the body, studying Harrow's face as though seeking the last expression it had held. At 9:40, raised voices, not merely urgent, defensive. Lady Anstruther's voice trembled. I did not hear words. No, Poirot said, but tone can speak. He straightened and faced the group. Consider the sequence. Mr. Harrow accuses Larkin of irregularities at 9:45. He has already been confronted by Sir Lionel earlier in the day. At 9:40, voices are heard, perhaps Sir Lionel's. Sir Lionel bristled. I was in the smoking room. Were you? Poirot asked mildly. Colonel Bellingham shifted. You stepped out before 10? Yes, to telephone. From the study, Poirot said softly, which lies but a few yards from this door. Sir Lionel's composure wavered for the first time.
You imply I entered here? I imply only that you were near, Poirot replied. Inspector Wainwright's voice cut in. Did you, Sir Lionel? No. Did you confront him again? I told you I had already spoken with him. Earlier, Poirot said. Yet you discovered further discrepancies after dinner, did you not? Sir Lionel's silence was answer enough. The air tightened perceptibly. If Mr. Harrow threatened exposure of your own dealings, Poirot continued quietly, and you realized his accounts would soon betray him, then his power diminished. He was no longer the master of secrets. He was vulnerable. Sir Lionel's hand gripped the chair's arm. This is conjecture. Perhaps, Poirot said. But let us examine the physical fact. The wound is clean, delivered by the letter opener at close range.
Will be not the act of a man in blind rage, but of calculation. Inspector Wainwright's eyes narrowed. A thrust from someone accustomed to decisive action. Sir Lionel's voice hardened. You tread dangerously close to accusation. Poirot inclined his head. I tread only upon logic. He lifted the ivory fragment once more. If Mr. Harrow wore the cufflinks at dinner, and one broke during the struggle, then the confrontation must have been immediate, close. Wainwright stepped nearer to Sir Lionel. Your cufflinks are intact. Yes. But you are a man of strength, the inspector pressed, capable of a swift, precise blow. Sir Lionel's jaw tightened. Poirot raised a hand gently. Inspector, haste is the enemy of clarity. He turned back to the desk and lifted a single sheet from the pile. Here, he said softly. A draft. In Mr.
In Harrow's hand. We leaned closer. It was a letter, unfinished. The first lines unmistakable. Sir Lionel, regarding the discrepancy of March 12th. The sentence trailed off. Inspector Wainwright exhaled slowly. He was writing to you. Yes, Poirot murmured, not to threaten but to accuse. The room seemed to tilt. Ashby spoke hoarsely. Then the missing letter, all may have been irrelevant to tonight's quarrel, Poirot said. Sir Lionel's face had gone very still. You suggest I killed him to prevent exposure? I suggest, Poirot replied quietly, that Mr. Harrow's alibi for his own conduct was collapsing, and when a man's certainty collapses, he may grasp at another's weakness. He looked steadily at Sir Lionel. "The small mistake, monsieur, was not in building your alibi upon 10 o'clock.
And it was in failing to destroy the draft he had already begun." The unfinished letter lay between them, silent and damning. And in its incomplete lines, the motive sharpened into something far more dangerous than scandal, a struggle not over reputation, but over ruin. Inspector Wainwright insisted that we return to the drawing room. "If there is to be an accusation," he said grimly, "it will be made plainly." We gathered once more before the fire, though no one sought its warmth now. The unfinished draft lay upon the central table, beside the ivory fragment and the taunting note. 3 small objects, each insignificant alone, yet together forming the skeleton of the truth. Poirot stood with his back to the mantel, immaculate as ever, his dark eyes luminous with quiet certainty. "My friends," he began gently, "we have pursued many threads this evening. Blackmail, scandal, missing letters, broken cufflinks, the hour of 10. Each has served to distract us, but as always, the little grey cells demand order." He lifted the draft addressed to Sir Lionel. "Mr. Harrow was accused earlier today of irregularities in the management of Lady Anstruther's funds. Sir Lionel discovered discrepancies. Harrow, cornered, sought to protect himself." Sir Lionel's face remained composed, though the knuckles of his right hand were pale. "Harrow possessed a compromising letter belonging to Mr. Ashby. He intended to use it as leverage. By summoning various parties tonight, he created an atmosphere of anxiety. But at 9:40, the true confrontation occurred, not about Ashby's indiscretions, but about the accounts." Lady Anstruther closed her eyes briefly. "Voices were heard," Poirot continued. "Not Harrow's alone. A deeper voice, Sir Lionel's voice. He left the smoking room shortly before 10, under the pretext of telephoning. In truth, he went to the blue sitting room." Sir Lionel's lips parted, but Poirot raised a hand. Harrow had begun to write this draft, an acknowledgment of discrepancies, perhaps even an admission. It threatened Sir Lionel's own position. For if Harrow confessed mismanagement, he would implicate the auditor, who had not uncovered it sooner. There were investments, I believe, in which both gentlemen were entangled. A flicker crossed Sir Lionel's eyes. "In the heated exchange," Poirot said softly, "Harrow attempted to assert control. He wore the ivory cufflinks, Lady Anstruther's gift. In the struggle, one broke and fell beneath the desk. Sir Lionel, a decisive man, I seized the letter opener and delivered a single, precise blow." Miss Vale gasped. Ashby stared fixedly at Sir Lionel. "The thud heard at 9:50, Poirot continued, "was the fall of the body. Sir Lionel, realizing the magnitude of his act, remained calm. He adjusted the scene. He opened the window to distort the doctor's estimate of time. He searched the desk, removing the compromising letter he had earlier supplied to Harrow, thus ensuring Ashby's continued vulnerability would distract suspicion. Inspector Wainwright's gaze sharpened. "And the note in the hall?" "A masterstroke of misdirection," Poirot replied. "Written upon scented stationery taken from Miss Vale's desk earlier in the evening. It was meant to draw suspicion towards scandal and passion, not finance and fraud." Miss Vale's face drained of colour. You went into my desk?" Sir Lionel did not answer. "He placed the note after 9:50, Poirot said, then proceeded to the study. At 5 minutes to 10 the clock chimed. He used it as the anchor of his alibi." Sir Lionel's composure cracked at last. "You build a tale from fragments and conjecture." Poirot inclined his head. "Then let us address certainty. The draft letter in Harrow's hand references March 12th, the date of a specific transfer. Inspector, you will find that transfer authorized not by Harrow, but by Sir Lionel. Wainwright's eyes widened slightly. Harrow discovered this, Poirot continued. He threatened exposure unless Sir Lionel supported his version of the accounts. It was a battle of mutual destruction. Sir Lionel rose abruptly. Lies. Then explain, Poirot said gently, why the draft exists.
Page, why you failed to mention discovering further discrepancies after dinner, why you alone had both motive and opportunity between 9:40 and 9:50, and why, when confronted earlier, you urged haste in choosing a suspect. Silence fell. The fire snapped faintly. Sir Lionel's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. He would have ruined me, he said at last, his voice low. Everything I built, he intended to confess and to implicate me. So you chose to silence him, Poirot said quietly. Yes. The words seemed to echo. Inspector Wainwright stepped forward. Sir Lionel Frobisher, I must ask you to come with me. Sir Lionel did not resist. As the constable approached, he glanced once at Lady Anstruther, an expression not of remorse, but of exhausted pride. When the door closed behind him, the room seemed to exhale.
Lady Anstruther sank into her chair. All this, she whispered, for money. For certainty, Poirot corrected softly. He believed he had constructed an alibi unassailable. 10 o'clock would shield him, but he forgot the fragment beneath the desk and the draft upon the blotter. Ashby ran a hand through his hair. And the letter? Poirot's gaze softened slightly. The letter was real, but it was not the motive for murder. It was merely convenient camouflage. Inspector Wainwright returned briefly. You were right, Monsieur Poirot. The March 12th transfer bears Sir Lionel's signature. Poirot inclined his head. The small mistake was assuming the obvious scandal was the true danger. In reality, the peril lay in the quiet columns of figures. The fire burned low now. Outside, the wind had stilled entirely. As we prepared to depart, I turned to Poirot. You knew from the beginning, did you not? He smiled faintly, adjusting his gloves with meticulous care. From the moment I saw how eagerly they clung to 10 o'clock, Hastings. When a man builds an alibi upon a precise minute, he forgets that time itself may betray him. He cast one last glance around the elegant room, its order restored, its secret exposed. Human nature, he murmured, is far less orderly than my moustaches, and yet with patience, even the smallest mistake may reveal the greatest truth. With that, Hercule Poirot stepped into the quiet London night, leaving behind a house that would never again trust the certainty of a clock striking 10.